This is video number 3 in a series. To see the first video, please click here or in the description below. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things, and keep the traditions just as I delivered them to you. But what is a tradition? The Greek word paradosis, something that is handed down or passed along, something that is received and delivered over and over. A classic example of a tradition is a relay race. The coach would give the baton to the first runner, and the first runner runs with it and then delivers it to runner number 2, who receives it from the first runner, runs with it, and then delivers it to runner number 3. Runner number 3 receives it from runner number 2, runs with it, and then delivers it to runner number 4, and so on down the line. That is a tradition, something which is passed down, handed down, or passed along. Other examples of a tradition would be hand-me-downs. Did you ever wear hand-me-downs when you were a kid? I did. When my older cousins would outgrow their clothes, they would pass them down to my sister, and she would wear them for a while until she outgrew them, and then I would get them. When I outgrew them, I would hand them on to my younger cousins. Family names can be a tradition. They can be passed down through the generations. Family heirlooms. What you eat at Thanksgiving is traditional. Some people eat turkey because their parents did and their grandparents did. It's something that's been handed down. Other people eat ham. So there are many traditions, but what about traditions in the scriptures? In the New Testament, there are 2 kinds of traditions. Those that were handed down from men and those who were handed down from the apostles. Those who were handed down from men are bad. They're condemned. Jesus condemned that in no uncertain terms, treating something that had its origin with human beings as if it came from God. That's wrong. But then traditions that are handed down from the apostles are to be honored and obeyed because they originated from the Lord. So Paul delivered traditions to the Corinthians. So those were apostolic traditions. Were they from heaven or from men? Well, obviously, if Paul delivered them to the Corinthian Christians, they would have been from heaven, from the Lord. He never would have delivered human traditions to the Corinthian Christians. And Paul tells us in verse 23 of chapter 11 where he got the tradition of the Lord's Supper. He says, "For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you." So the Lord's Supper is an apostolic tradition. Paul received the tradition of the Lord's Supper from the Lord, and he handed it on to other Christians. Now, some say that the Lord's Supper is a command. And it is a command, even though Jesus never uses that word command. But he said, do this. Do this in memory of me. And when someone tells you to do something, they're commanding you. But Jesus did not command us to keep the Lord's Supper. We were not there in that upper room on the night when he was betrayed. We hadn't even been born yet. Jesus gave that commandment to his apostles who were there, and the apostles received it from the Lord, and they delivered it or handed it on to other disciples. So the Lord's Supper is an apostolic tradition. And after Paul talks about the fact that he had delivered traditions to the Corinthian Christians, he begins the next sentence with the conjunction but I want you to know, and so on. And then he talks about the head covering. But is a conjunction. And the function of a conjunction is to join. Conjunctions join words, they join phrases, and they join sentences. A sentence which begins with a conjunction is tied to the previous sentence. So, but is a conjunction which joins verse 3, which is the start of the head covering passage, to verse 2, which is talking about apostolic traditions. So the head covering is the middle of a sandwich. It is sandwiched between verse 2, where Paul said that he had delivered traditions to them, and the second half of chapter 11, which is the tradition of the Lord's Supper. The head covering is right in the middle. It's sandwiched between traditions, and it's joined to the verse about traditions by the conjunction but. So the conclusion is inescapable. The head covering is an apostolic tradition, just like the Lord's Supper is. So, is the Lord's Supper a matter of conscience? Would it be okay for us to disagree about the Lord's Supper? Would it be okay for some of us to eat the bread and drink the cup while others of us abstain from drinking and eating? Is it okay for all of us to understand the Lord's Supper differently and all have different minds about it? It's not okay to treat the head covering that way either. Coming up in the next video, how can something perfect be improved?